Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the question of why you should check out the Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur show on Disney+. Now, no spoilers in this video because I want you to watch it even if you haven't seen the show, because I'm hoping to convince you to give it a chance. Because if you're like me, you probably took one look at this and said, does not interest me, doesn't look like it's tied to the MCU, hard pass. However, thanks to some very persistent people on the Discord server, particularly Various. Various, thank you so much for convincing me to watch this show, but also being so helpful in putting together this video. Various was amazing. So thanks to Various and a few others, I went ahead and gave it a chance. And oh my goodness, it is awesome. I'm hooked. I would say don't give up on the first episode, because I was ready to. Give it a couple episodes, at least up to episode 3. And I'm betting by then you'll be hooked too. Awesome show. So let's dive right in and find out all the reasons you should check this show out. So first of all, the main characters are, well, you guessed it, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. No big surprise, right? And so really from the very first episode, we see how they meet. I won't go into the details. There's no spoilers really, but still, I'll let you experience it for the first time. But yes, they get together and they're heroes right from the get-go. So it really gets rolling pretty fast. And their relationship is one of the highlights of the show. The two are just so great together. Now, there are, though, some very big differences from the comics. The comics started in 2015. Her first issue was in 2015. Very popular. But one of the biggest differences in the comics, she's 9. But in the series, she's 13. You may say, what's 4 years? What does that matter? Well, the series really focuses on problems, everyday problems that teenagers go through. So aging her up a bit to the teen years really made a lot of sense. They lean heavily into that, and it's really kind of cool to see how they deal with those different things. But also, there's another big change. In the comics, Lunella, Moon Girl, is an Inhuman. And in particular, her inhuman power is her ability to communicate with Devil. Now, her smarts, she already had. She is one of the smartest people probably in the MCU, and at age 13, that's really cool. And of course, being black, that's really cool too. Wonderful representation in the series. But in the Disney Plus show, she is not an Inhuman, and she's not even a mutant. She's just a really, really smart kid. And you'll have to see how she forms her bond with Devil. But I just wanted to point that out, that it's very different from the comics. And if you think about it, 2015, when the Moon Girl comic came out, Marvel was really leaning heavily into the Inhumans. Remember Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel? She was an Inhuman in the comics and, of course, is a mutant in the MCU. So maybe we'll find out Lunella is a mutant. But right now, at least they've not revealed that. So, all right, those are a couple of big differences. But I do like this. There is one episode that really kind of winks at that ability that Lunella had in the comics to be able to literally mind read and commune with Devil. There's an episode where their personalities get switched. Really funny episode. But that's kind of like a cute way of saying, we know what it was in the comics and we're not going to go there, but here, we'll give you a little nod towards that. So I thought that was really well done. It's also worth noting there is no relationship whatsoever between the 70s comic Devil Dinosaur, which of course also had Moon Boy. So we have Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, and there was a Moon Boy and Devil Dinosaur, but there is no tie. And if you think about it, probably it would be pretty racially insensitive to have Moon Girl inspired by an evolved ape, basically, a talking, first human, yes, but very ape-like. Not a good racially sensitive move to go. So very smart that Marvel said, no, there's no tie. Yeah, Devil Dinosaur, and we know that that's the same character, but Moon Boy and Moon Girl are not the same. It is weird, though, that they still went with Moon Boy and Moon Girl. Those are pretty similar. But anyway, I just wanted to stress there is no tie between those two characters. All right, so while we haven't seen Lunella in the MCU yet, she is actually featured in the Web Slingers ride in Disneyland. So as you walk through one of the early displays, you can see on the far right, upper right, there is Lunella Lafayette. Pretty cool. Little information about her there. She has a devil, I should say, has a locker. You can see in the lower left. And then it's kind of fun. When you get in and just before you get on the ride, they kind of have the introduction and Peter Parker comes out and talks to you. But there's even a nod towards Devil Dinosaur here. If you look right there is a little Devil Dinosaur. And if we zoom in, there he is. That's pretty cool. So, yeah, Lunella has certainly been around from an amusement park ride standpoint, but now is her first series. So, very, very cool. All right, one of the highlights of the show, I think, is the friendship between Casey on the left, her best friend, and Lunella. It's great to see them interact together. They're just, it's amazing. Teenage friendship at its best. What's also cool is the actresses portraying each of the two characters were asked and even, required, if you will, to be together to do their audio takes. Because, you imagine when you're just doing audio drops, you could do it from home. But they wanted them together to get a bond and a synergy, and it really worked. Now, later they had to move to Zoom because of COVID, but the fact that they had the two actresses together for their early recordings really, really helped with this bond. I think that's really cool. Another fun little thing, the actress that plays Casey has a tie to Runaways. This is wild. So in an interview, she said that her sister is Ariel, who is on Marvel's Runaways. In particular, her sister plays Gert. And of course, what does Gert have a bond with? Well, a dinosaur. Isn't that kind of wild? So each sister is in a show where there's a bond with a dinosaur. You got to love it, right? You got to love this stuff. All right. So Lunella's family is also a very important part of the show. On the left are her grandparents, and on the right are her parents. So I kind of just thought they were comedic relief, but all I'll say is just hang with them. Hang with them, stay with them, pay attention, because they do play into some very important things later in the season. So one of the things I thought was really interesting is you can actually see what would have been commercial breaks if you were watching it on the Disney Channel. Because on the Disney Channel, it took commercial breaks and then came back again. Now, I promise on Disney Plus, there are no commercials, but it's kind of fun. They kept in the graphic images that showed up right before the commercial break and then right after the commercial break. It's a little weird at first, but you kind of get into it the longer it goes on. So I thought that was a fun little touch that they kept those in, even if you watch it on Disney Plus. But again, I promise, no commercials. Don't worry. All right. The episodes touch on very real-life topics for teenagers, as I alluded to. Yeah, that looks really strange, I know. But this episode deals with hair, and particularly for teenagers, and particularly for girls, and especially for African-American girls, hair can be a very big deal. What products to put in, how does it look, etc., etc. So this episode really leans into that topic. Was a really, really interesting episode. So I think all of them deal with different teenage topics, but this one was a great example, at least for me, to illustrate in this video of how well they deal with teenage issues and what they go through. So very, very cool. All right, another recurring theme is musical numbers during the fight scenes. So it almost feels like it's inspired from Guardians of the Galaxy, but she'll put in a cassette tape and play a song on her little player, and then they'll go to a musical number. But notice the graphics and the visual style really changes. They had mentioned that the Spider-Verse movies inspired them, and it's a very, very different style. It doesn't look like the Spider-Verse, but they said basically that Spider-Verse inspired them to go, oh wow, we can go crazy with this stuff. We can get really wild. So it's just very interesting during the fight scenes. How color-wise, how beautiful it is. So one of my favorite parts, actually, were the different fights. All right, so this is interesting. So she lives on the LES, or the Lower East Side in New York, and one of the focuses is that kind of the Avengers, who do exist in the universe, don't really go down to the LES. In this episode here, she's complaining about why don't the Avengers do something. So it's very, very cool that she's kind of become the local hero, almost like Daredevil in Hell's Kitchen. She's the local hero on the LES. So very neat. But speaking of, is the show in the main 616 universe? Is it part of the multiverse? We're going to cover that later. But is it part of the main 616 universe? Well, they answer that. There's an interview here that was done on the Disney Channel where the creators said they like to think of them as complementary to the MCU. I'd never heard that phrase before, but that's kind of clever. So, in other words, they're part of the multiverse, as we'll see a little later on, but they're not part of the main MCU. In fact, here was an interview they did on Popverse, and notice they said, the article says, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur takes place in its own world, away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We aren't really connected to the MCU officially, Fishburne says, and that is Lawrence Fishburne, who it turns out is a huge comic book fan, and executive produced the show, really pushed Feige to do the show. Not so much pushed him, but went to Feige and said, hey, can we do this? I'm really excited. Can we do this? So I love that. Lawrence Fishburne's awesome. But he goes on to say our show is really a family show. We're not going to save the world, but we are going to save the Lower East Side. And then they also say it's that they always like to say it's complementary to the MCU because you'll see a couple of MCU characters in the show. You'll see that some of the characters we have are very, very deep cuts, and we'll get into that in Marvel Comics. Like, you really got to dive to actually find them. There's a lot of Easter eggs, not just backgrounds, but there's also Easter eggs all over the place, even in some dialogue and some other places. Stay tuned, make a list. There's quite a few because we're big fans too. I love that. All right. So, to that point, you will see Easter eggs for the Avengers. There's a Captain America mural, a graffiti mural on the wall at one point. There's an episode where someone starts stealing some of the Avengers' tech. And then we do get a very brief appearance, and I do mean brief, but it's cool when it happens, by Falcon. And I bring that up just to say, notice he's in the newer costume. So from a timeline standpoint, it's probably happening around the same time as the regular MCU. It's just, again, in a different world. But yeah, I mean, literally Falcon is in it for 3 seconds, but they're a very cool 3 seconds. So also, there's Easter eggs for Wakanda. They mention a Wakandan Outreach Center, which is in Manhattan. And then when Lunella is thinking about how badly she wants to go, we see the images of Black Panther there and Shuri, so that's cool. There's an epic Days of Future Past Easter egg. I'm not going to go into how, you're going to have to see the episode, but I love this poster. And Titan, as well as others, tried to come up with the list of who each of these characters are. So I'm going to rattle them off real fast, and if you think some of these are wrong, let us know. But it's a lot of great deep cuts here. So we have Deathlock, Blue Marble, Sleepwalker, Darkhawk, Swordsman, Jocasta, White Tiger, Triathlon, Moondragon, Hellcat, Paladin, Stingray, Jolt, Black Knight, Demolition Man, and Smasher. Very cool. So let me know if you think those are all right, but they sounded right to me. So awesome. Also, Bill Foster makes a key appearance. If you remember, I mentioned Lawrence Fishburne really, sold the idea for the show. So of course, his character in the MCU is going to make an appearance, right? And it's very cool. And Maria Hill, as well as S.H.I.E.L.D., make a key appearance. Now, that's what's interesting. This shows definitely that this is not the MCU because S.H.I.E.L.D. is still a major organization. In fact, we see their headquarters. So it's a major organization in this world. But Maria Hill is actually voiced by the same actress, which is cool. I love her. Any chance we get to see Maria Hill makes me happy. All right. There's even little Easter eggs for WHIH. You can see the microphone there. WHIH Newsfront did several newscasts throughout the MCU. And there's even a fun little Deadpool and Spider-Man Easter egg. You'll have to watch it to see why they're bringing that up, but it's just kind of fun. They're definitely saying, we know who these characters are. They're all in the same universe. It's just a different universe than the MCU. All right, so earlier they mentioned deep cuts. Well, let's look at some of the villains, because there are some deep cut villains in this show. So Aftershock is in the first episode. So in each case here, on the left will be the comic version, and on the right will be the version from the Disney show. And Aftershock, as far as I understand, is related to the Electro, like maybe the daughter. And there's been multiple versions, actually, of Aftershock in the comics. But I think she's related to Max Dillon in several of the iterations. In the show, they don't really go into her background, but clearly it's the same character. So that's cool. Devos, the Devastator, a Fantastic Four villain, he shows up. He's pretty cool. Gravitas is interesting. Not Gravitron, but Gravitas. There is a Gravitas in the comics, but notice it's a race swap and a gender swap in this case, which is fine. I like when they do that. But yeah, he shows up. Siphon is in the comics, and Siphonator is in the series, seemingly an inspired version from that. Very different in execution in the series, believe me, but it seems to be inspired by Siphon. Abyss, absolutely the same. You can almost see the costume there is intentionally made to be the same. Really cool villain. Odessa Drake, it's the same name, but very, very different character. So loose adaptation, very loose adaptation. Then this one's great, Lady Stiltman. I didn't even know there was a Lady Stiltman. I hadn't read those comics. Does not use that name in the series. Uses Stiletto, but certainly seems to be inspired by Lady Stiltman. Torg, the Abominable Snow King. Wow, deep cut. But yeah, has a really good appearance in the series. Dr. Maris Morlack and the Enclave. Totally different, right? I mean, not only, race swapped, but I mean, just handled very, very differently, but the exact same name. So clearly they pulled some inspiration from the comics here. And then the big one, and I promise you this is not a spoiler because literally there's an episode with the name of this character in it. So we need to talk about the Beyonder. They do indeed have a Beyonder. Clearly doesn't look like the Beyonder we've seen, although the series implies there's more than one, which is interesting. But the Beyonder is fantastic in the series. But let's talk a little bit about this because this is interesting. So in an interview with Deadline says one of the characters you've adapted differently from the comics is Beyonder, played here as a sing-songy, flashy, charismatic man voiced by none other than Lawrence Fishburne. So he does a couple different voices. Considering that he's also such an obscure character, how did he end up in the series as a fun new addition? Now, let me stop right there. I think it's fascinating they call the Beyonder obscure, because I think anybody watching this video probably knows who the Beyonder is and can't wait to see him show up in Secret Wars. But that's interesting. They consider him to be obscure. Okay, well, so one of the showrunners says, well, it's funny because the Beyonder was, get this, a suggestion by Kevin Feige. So hold that thought, because that is very interesting. Who thought it would be a perfect foil for Lunella to deal with. And then they go on to say the Beyonder may not be well known to some folks who are not a layman of the comic books, but he's a major character in the Secret Wars comic books. So if you're into comics and Marvel lore, he's a big deal. Okay, Kevin Feige suggested it. Kevin Feige does nothing by accident. Everything Kevin Feige does is planned out and thought out. So that is fascinating. And by the way, the Beyonder appears in more than one episode too. So very, very cool. And there's a Battle World Easter egg in some of the episodes that the Beyonder's in. It's like Battle World comics, games, and toys. But yeah, that is very, very interesting. So I think they're definitely hinting at some things here. The Beyonder episode also has a fun 616 Easter egg. You can see Symphony number 616 in B minor, and then there's his book by the Beyonder. So when he does his song, remember how I mentioned there's a song when they do the different fights and stuff. His is Symphony number 616. Very interesting. And the show does involve a multiversal portal, which we see at various times throughout the series, starting way back in the first episode. So yeah, we have a Beyonder, Battle World, and mention of the multiverse. I think it's pretty clear we are eventually going to get a live-action Lunella showing up in the MCU, which would be awesome. In fact, let's talk about that. May we be getting one? Well, this article by Insider says it could be a little while before we see Lunella interact with the other MCU characters outside of Disney's theme park space. Remember, I talked about the theme park ride. We have plenty of stories to tell of Lunella in animation, the executive producer said. And there's a chance, though, we may see Lunella in live action, because he said if it turns into a live action property somewhere down the line, we'd be excited. I think we opened up the door for a possibility. So yeah, very interesting. So taking a little pause there for a second, these are the reasons I'm saying you might want to check this show out. It isn't just homework. Number one, it's a good show. I really enjoyed it once I got into it. But number two, I really think we're going to see some ties by the time we get to Secret Wars, and we may indeed get a live-action Lunella, which is very, very cool, and a live-action Devil Dinosaur. Now, and even the post-credit scene, the final episode does have a post-credit scene. It's not very revealing, but it is key, and I'm not going to go into it any more than that, but you have to see why she's so surprised. But yeah, very, very, very cool. But you might also be saying, okay, well, is this just one and done? I mean, that's fine if it's one and done. If it's a good series, then so be it. No, it's actually already had the second season greenlit even before the premiere. According to Marvel's own website, at the NYCC 2022, they were given a second season. Notice Disney branded television has ordered a second season of the highly anticipated animated series Marvel's Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. So yeah, it's already even getting a second season. And believe me, that post-credit scene is a cliffhanger. So it would seem pretty clear we were going to get a second season. So there you go. That's why I think you should check this show out. I really do think you'll enjoy it, and I loved it. But even if it's just to learn all these different things for her eventually showing up, it's probably worth it for that alone. But I promise you, you're going to get hooked before you get done. So please, please check it out. And let me know in the comments what you think. If you're going to watch it, if you already watched it, what you thought about the series, I'd love to know. And then also, as always, I briefly mentioned we do have a Discord server. I will put a pinned comment with a link to that if you want to get on and talk about Devil Dinosaur and anything else you want to talk about. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we can all continue to watch the ever-changing, ever-growing Marvel Cinematic Universe.